Hello, what's up guys? Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be covering Aquinas of goodness in general. I believe this is question 5 or 6 of the Prima parts of the Summa Theologiae. Let's get started. Now, here's some heads up. I did not put the objections. So Aquinas' Summa Theologiae is set up in like a disputatio sense, where he gives us a set of objections and he replies to those objections. I only cover his general or his like answer and then his reply to the objections. I do not put the objections themselves. But I still do put the reply of the objections in a certain way. It's implicitly there. Alright, let's get started. So, well, this is a new series, I guess. Aquinas today keeps an atheist away. Sorry, I think that is my phone. I gotta shut that off. It's so annoying. Alright, I'm back. Anyways, yes, Aquinas today keeps an atheist away. So let's get started. And there are 6 questions that St. Thomas answers in this question, right? Or these 6 articles. 1. Whether goodness and being are the same really. And 2. Granted that they differ only in idea, which is prior in thought. 3. Granted that being is prior, whether every being is good. 4. To what cause should goodness be reduced? 5. Whether goodness consists in mode, species, and order. And 6. Whether goodness is divided into the virtuous, the useful, and the pleasant. Alright, let's get started on the first article. So Article 1. Whether goodness differs really from being. And so the answer is in the negative. Aquinas says no. So Aquinas starts off by citing De Doctrina Christiana by Augustine, where Augustine says, inasmuch as we exist, we are good. For Aquinas, goodness and being are really the same thing and differ only in idea or logically. So this is a logical distinction, meaning it's not based on reality. There is no metaphysical distinction between them, only virtually or logically. Because in the sense, goodness has the added feature of desirability, since, in Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle said that goodness is that which all things, aim at or desire. So this distinction is logical because it's found upon the mind. It's not based upon reality, so it doesn't have its foundation of reality. There's also certain distinctions I will cover in the future, like a modal distinction, which is a distinction of the substance from its effect. For example, Socrates and him sitting. So there's a modal distinction between that. There's a major real distinction and a minor real distinction as well, which I'll cover later. That's a whole nother separate issue. But back to the video. And so a thing is desirable because it is perfect. That is why all desire their own perfection. And everything is perfect insofar as it is act or actual. So actuality is seen as being perfect in some way, right? Potency is not. That's why pure potency is just non-being, right? Like prime matter doesn't actually exist, right? And so therefore a thing is perfect so far as it exists, because existence makes all things actual. And so being and goodness are really the same. So why does existence make all things actual, you might ask? Well, for example, let's say we have a phoenix, right? Take this example from De Ente. A phoenix, we know what the essence of a phoenix is, but we can still be ignorant that it exists. But if we know the essence of a thing, we know that it can potentially exist or potentially not exist. And if it were to exist, it would have to receive its existence, and that existence would be its actuality, that an actually existing phoenix. And actuality, obviously, I've covered why it's more supreme than potency, because a potency can admit the opposite, right? A phoenix could either exist or not exist, right? But actuality is already perfect. And so being and goodness are really just the same thing. Now back to the distinction between goodness and being. It is a logical distinction, and goodness and being, they're not predicated of the same absolutely, because being means something actually is, right? Actually in reality, and actuality correlates to potentiality, right? And a thing is said to have being when it is distinguished from what is only in potentiality. As I gave you the example of a phoenix, right? It can only potentially exist. We can still be ignorant that, it doesn't exist. We know its essence and stuff. And this is what Aquinas calls substantial being. So a substantial being is a being that actually exists and is just distinguished from what is only in potentiality. And so substantial being is that by which everything is said to have existence or being, right? I use being and existence interchangeably, right? Simply and any other further actuality, it is said to have being relatively. So an example of this would be like a white man. Socrates is white, right? That's to set that is what it means to have being relatively. And so goodness signifies perfection, which is desirable, right? Um, and now don't get confused with this sense of desire, because this sense of desire is not the colloquial sense. It's a metaphysical sense, right? So please don't get confused on that. So goodness signifies perfection, which is desirable, and thus consequently ultimate perfection. But that has ultimate perfection is simply called good, or simply good. Now, something that doesn't have the ultimate perfection it ought to have is not said to be good simply, or perfect simply, but only relatively. Thus, in this way, a thing is called simply, and is relatively good insofar as it has being or some act, but in complete actuality, it is said to be relatively and simply good. Right? And so when Boethius says, I perceive that in nature the fact that things are good is one thing, and that they are is another. He simply just means a goodness simply, and he just simply means a thing's goodness simply, and its being simply. Because remember, a thing considered substantially just exists, right? And any other further thing is just, relative. And when we regard it in its complete actuality, right? Like its complete perfection that it ought to have, it is good simply. Alright, so that's what he means. And so goodness is also a form when absolute goodness signifies complete actuality, which just means complete perfection. And so Aquinas also clarifies that although goodness and being are really the same, goodness can be spoken of more or less, because goodness does admit of degrees, according to a thing's further added actualities. For example, knowledge or virtue or wisdom. Article 2, whether goodness is prior in idea to being. So to start off with, the answer is in the negative. So Aquinas' position is that no, being is prior to goodness, not the other way around. So he first cites Aristotle in De Causis. The first of created things is being. So for Aquinas, being is prior to goodness logically. This is because the meaning conveyed by a term is what the mind conceives of the thing and intends by the word or term that stands for it. So when you think of a term, you conceive of that thing, right, as existing. So what is prior in idea is going to be the first one conceived by the intellect, which is being, existence. So Aquinas is really just saying here, whenever you want to conceive of a good thing, you have to necessarily conceive of it existing. And everything is knowable inasmuch as it is in actuality. Right? And so therefore, being is the proper object of the intellect because it's literally primarily intelligible. And the first thing you conceive of when you think of a term. Right? So like if I want to conceive of anything, I have to conceive of it existing. Signified act, basically. Now, goodness with the feature of desirability implies the notion of a final cause, since goodness is what all things desire. And so goodness is goodness is the first among the causes because an agent acts for some end. So this really goes back to the principle of finality. So thus the end is called the causes of causes. Now this is important because goodness in the sense of being a cause is prior to being as is end to form. This is important because Dionysius in Divine Names discusses the divine names as having some causal relation to God. So names that convey divine causation, goodness is going to be prior to being. So basically goodness is prior to being in the act of causation, since an agent has to necessarily he acts for an end, and the end is good. So thus the mistakes of the Platonists was that they assumed matter was non-being because they didn't distinguish primary matter from privation. But Aquinas says that goodness is more extensively participated than being. This has shown that primary matter participates in goodness as it tends to it because all seek their like. And so primary matter does participate in goodness, but not in being, because it is assumed to be non-being. That's why Dionysius says goodness extends to non-existence in Divine Names, Book 5. Now when Aquinas says goodness extends to being and non-being, not as it can be predicated of them, but rather as it can cause them. So by non-existence, we mean something, that doesn't actually exist in reality, but only could potentially exist. And going back, goodness has the aspect of the end in things, where actual things find their completion, right? But also towards things that are not actual, that are said to be in potential to what it moves towards. Being, on the other hand, or existence, only acts as a formal cause, either inherent or exemplary, which, ideally, by the way, this is just, you can have a synonym for that. And its causality does not extend anywhere else except things that are actual. So being, formal cause, only extends to things that are actual, and goodness can extend to non-existing things, Now, non-being is also desirable, not from itself, but only relatively. So, right here you can see that, so non-being can be seen as desirable in certain situations, like when it helps get rid of something bad. For example, we might want something to stop existing if it's causing harm or suffering. So in a sense, non-being is desirable, but it's not from itself. It's not desirable in of itself, but only relatively. So in relation to something, basically. And so on the other hand, being is desirable. So existence is desirable of itself, and non-being relatively. So non-being can be said to be relatively good in relation to something, basically. And so Aquinas also mentions how life, wisdom, and the like are desirable, but only insofar as they are actual, right? Insofar as they actually exist in reality. So when we desire these things, that's because they actually are existing. They are, right? And when we're desiring something, we're just desiring being in some form. Therefore, nothing can be desired except non-being, and thus only what is good is being. Article 3. Whether every being is good. The answer is in the affirmative. Aquinas first states that every being that is not God is God's creature, and every creature of God is good. 1 Timothy 4, chapter 4, verse 4. And God is the greatest good. Aquinas says that every being, as creature, is good because all being, as being, has actuality, right? It's not in the state of it's not just its essence anymore. Its essence is tied with existence, right? It doesn't potentially exist. It already actually exists. And so it is perfect in some way because act implies some sort of perfection, and consequently, perfection implies desirability and goodness. Therefore, every being is good. Now, although substance, quality, quantity, etc., limit being by applying itself to essences, as accidents sometimes. In this sense, goodness does not add anything to being except the feature of desirability and perfection. But these concepts are already proper to the notion of being. So, also, when we call somebody or something evil, like John is evil, no being can be called evil formally as being, right? But only as it lacks being. So thus John is said to be evil, maybe because he lacks virtue. Now going back to primary matter, because primary matter has only potential being, right, potency, it's just pure potency, it's only potentially good. And it does participate in a certain extent in goodness by its relation or desire for goodness. So it itself is not desirable, but it desires, right? So prime matter is not desirable. It desires itself. And when I say it desires itself, I'm not saying that, it desires itself like I desire myself. No, I'm saying it desires. Okay, so don't get confused. What about mathematical entities? Aren't they good? I mean, they sure exist, right? They're entities. Well, Aquinas answers that mathematical entities are not subsistences, meaning they do not exist as independent realities, because they would thus then be good if they subsisted. But these mathematical entities only have logical existence as they are abstracted from matter and motion. Just kind of the same like how genus and species is abstracted and is our logical intentions. They also cannot have the aspect of an end because an end has the aspect of moving another. It's also not strange that mathematical ideas don't have goodness in the way we think of it, because the idea of being comes before the idea of goodness. But being just means something exists, while goodness is about how complete or perfect that existence is. So mathematical entities are just abstract concepts and don't fit into the idea of goodness in the same way real things do. And that's basically it. Article 4. Whether goodness has the aspect of a final cause, which you already know the answer. Yes, it does. So the answer is in the affirmative. The reason why I'm answering like this is like John of St. Thomas. He answers like this. I actually ordered John of St. Thomas's book, Cursus Philosophicus, or Course of Thomistic Philosophy. It's coming on Wednesday. I'm very excited for that. Now, Aquinas cites Aristotle in the Physics, Book 2, that is to be considered as the end and the good of other things, for the sake of which something is. Now Aquinas says that because goodness is that by which all things desire and seek, and this has the aspect of an end or purpose, the idea of goodness, it also presupposes the idea of an efficient cause and formal cause. This is because what is first in causing is the last in the thing caused. So a great example of this, Aquinas gives us, fire, for example, heats first of all, before it reproduces the form of fire, but the heat follows from the fire's substantial form. Now in causation or act of causation, goodness and the end come first, because both of which they move the agent to act, right? The agent acts for some purpose or reason, and the action of the agent comes secondly when they are moving to the form, and thirdly comes the form, as you can see from this example as well. And therefore, in that which is caused, the opposite should take place. So there is first the form, whereby it is a being, then second, we look at its effective causal power, whereby it is perfect or actual in being, for a thing is said to be actual or perfect when it can reproduce its like. So, a great example of this is, man comes from man, a tree comes from a tree, right? So a thing is called actual or perfect when it could reproduce itself in a way. So fire produces a form of fire, right? It reproduces the form of fire, as I gave you the example above. Hope that clears it up. And Aquinas also talks about goodness and beauty. Goodness and beauty are really identical. I think beauty was added as a transcendental by Saint Bonaventure later, and so goodness and beauty are really identical fundamentally because they're based upon the same thing, that is the form, and so goodness is also praised as being beautiful. However, they differ logically, remember, because goodness relates to appetite, remember, because it's desire. Goodness is that which all things desire, and it has the aspect of an end. So, but beauty relates to the cognitive faculty for beautiful things. So beautiful things are those which, pleases us when seen. So when we see, a beautiful painting, that we call it beautiful because it pleases us, right? And we find things beautiful when they are well ordered or, formal, balanced, or have the right shape, because our senses and minds are naturally just drawn to that kind of thing, right? And so sense is a sort of reason, just as is every, cognitive faculty. And so sense is a sort of reason in some sense. So beauty also properly belongs to the nature of a formal cause. And knowledge is by assimilation, and similarity relates to form, right? Because that's literally what a form is, right? You see it in many things. Or, you see many properties in more than one thing. And so goodness is also described as self-diffusive, which just means it spreads out, by the way, in the sense that an end is said to move, right? The purpose. So he who has a will is said to be good inasmuch as he has a good will, since by the will we act and employ our powers. And a man is said to be good not because he has good understanding, but by his good will. and the will relates to the end as its proper object, since, agents act for an end. So the saying, we exist because God is good, has a reference to the final cause. Article 5. Whether the essence of goodness consists in mode, species, and order. Now, the answer for this article is in the affirmative. So first off, Aquinas cites De Natura Boni by Augustine. These three modes, species and order, as common good things, are in everything God has made. Thus, where these three abound, the things are very good. Where they are less, the things are less good. Where they do not exist at all, there can be nothing good. So Aquinas claims that this wouldn't be the case unless the essence of goodness consisted in, mode, species, and order. Thus, the essence of goodness does consist in mode, species, and order, because if it didn't consist in them, then they're not good, right? And so, everything is said to be good in as much as it is perfect. And in this way, it is called, or it is said to be desirable. And a thing is said to be perfect if it lacks nothing in its mode, way of perfection. Yes, something can be called perfect if it's not absolutely perfect, right? And mode is just means way. So when I say mode of being, it's just mode of existence, a way of existence, right? So that just clarifies some things up. And since everything is what it is through its form, and the form presupposes certain things, and from the form certain things necessarily follow, in order for a thing to be perfect or good, it has to have a form. Sorry for the slight grammar issue right here. Form depends on the proper arrangement of its principles, which is called mode or way. So the form gives a thing its species or identity, like how a small change in a number or definition changes its kind. From form comes a natural tendency toward a goal or action, which relates to order, since for everything, insofar as it is an act, acts and tends towards that which is in accordance with its form, so it has a natural potency for that. Therefore, the perfection of goodness consists in mode, species, and order. Species, mode, and order follow on being inasmuch as it is perfect, and according to this perfection is it good. Mode, species, and order are also said to be beings and good, but note that this is because they are not subsistences, but only because through them other things are said to be beings and good. So they're not beings in the sense that they're independent realities like a substance that exists in of itself, but through them other things are said to exist and be good. So they are spoken as good, not as being constituted by another thing, but formally constituting others good itself and being. And so, according to every being is its mode, species, and order. So a man has a mode, species, and order as he is white, virtuous, etc., blah, blah, blah. Now, although evil is a privation of being or something, like, blindness is a privation of sight, it doesn't destroy every mode or species or order, but only removes some certain aspects that should be there, which is usually connected to them. So mode, species, and order can be called evil only in the sense that they are called being less than they ought to be. So they're called evil because they're out of place, right? But nothing can be formally called evil in being. Article 6. Whether goodness is rightly divided into the virtuous, the useful, and the pleasant. The answer is in the affirmative. Now, remember, everything is good insofar as it is desirable, and is a term of the movement of the appetite, right? Appetite, when we speak of that, we're talking about desire. So the movement can be seen from a natural body, which is terminated by the end absolutely and relatively by the means through which it comes to an end. So, the end is what terminates the movement of a natural body absolutely, and it's also relatively terminated by the means through which it comes to the end, right? So the means could be like, using this thing to get to there, right? And so a thing is called a term of movement so far as it terminates any part of that movement. So the ultimate term of movement is taken in two ways. One, the thing itself toward which it moves. For example, a place or form. Second, a state of rest in that thing. So We desire useful things to get to something else. We desire virtuous things because they are good in themselves, and we desire pleasant things because they feel good when we get them. And as Aquinas puts it, thus in the movement of the appetite, the thing desired that terminates the movement or the appetite relatively as a means by which something tends towards another is called the useful, right? Because when something is terminated relatively, it's only through the means to get to the end. So that's why it's called the useful. But that sought after as the last thing absolutely ending or terminating the movement of the appetite as a thing towards which for its own sake the appetite tends, where the appetite tends or moves towards for its own sake, that is called the virtuous, because it is pursued for its own sake. And so for the virtuous is that which is desired for its own sake, as I have already elaborated, but that which terminates the movement of the appetite in the form of rest in the thing desired is called pleasant, which is pretty much self-explanatory. Now, goodness being identical with being is divided into the 10 categories, and this division belongs to it according to its proper formality. Now, this division doesn't occur because of opposite things, but only opposite aspects. Things that are called pleasing have no other formality under which they are pleasant. The useful are said that they are not desirable in themselves, but are desired as a means to achieving something further. So obviously they're just relatively desirable, because they have their desirability in relation to something else. Now the virtuous obviously is desired for its own, or for itself or its own sake. Now, goodness is not divided into the virtuous, pleasant, and useful as something predicated of them univocally or equally at all, right? Univocally it just means the same sense. Rather, goodness is predicated of these three analogically according to priority and posteriority. So really that just means after and before. So the order goes like this of the predication of good: the virtuous, then the pleasant, then the useful. So this is how predication, or analogical predication of the good when it occurs in these three. And that's basically it for this question in the Summa Theologiae. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe. Oh, and this is John of St. Thomas, the greatest Thomist of all time. Pretty much, yes, he is the greatest Thomist of all time. I actually am getting his book, Cursus Philosophicus Thomisticus, which is just course of Thomistic philosophy, and I'm very excited to get it. Thank you guys for watching. Have a good day.